Hey girl gang, it's Dr. Joy here and you are watching Delivering Joy MD TV. Welcome to Well Woman Wednesdays, where we have been talking about sexually transmitted infections. Today's topic is syphilis, which is a really important sexually transmitted infection to know all about. So make sure you keep watching. All right, let's jump into this topic because I have a lot to cover today. Syphilis is a bacterial infection that is caused by sex, and that could be oral, vaginal, or anal sex. Syphilis is caused by the bacteria Treponema pallidum. That's Treponema pallidum. I know it's like a huge word, but this infection can infect the mouth, the vagina, or the anus, and it is an infection that has been on the rise lately. So we have been talking about how the CDC has analyzed data up until 2018, and in 2018 there were about 35,000 new cases of syphilis, and in 2018 there were about 35,000 primary and secondary infections with syphilis that were newly diagnosed. Now, the interesting thing about syphilis is that you can only pass it to other people if you're in the primary or the secondary phase. And there are actually 4 phases of syphilis that can occur. So some folks who were diagnosed late in their infection history and were no longer actually infectious. So that's an important thing to note about syphilis. We're going to learn about these 4 phases today. Another very concerning statistic about syphilis is that more pregnant women are becoming infected. In 2018, there were about 1,300 new cases that were diagnosed during pregnancy. Syphilis in pregnancy can be devastating. So those of us who are considering becoming pregnant or who are pregnant really need to understand syphilis, how it works, how it's treated, and make sure that we are tested. Of those pregnant women who were diagnosed, we found that there was a startling disparity. Black and brown women are 6.5 times more likely to be diagnosed with syphilis during their pregnancy. And this is not because there's anything genetically wrong with black or brown women or that black and brown women are more promiscuous than others, but it is because we tend to have a lack of access to care. So we may not be getting tested as much as we should be. We may not have a medical home, which is a place where you're going regularly for checkups. So that is why black and brown women are more likely to be diagnosed with syphilis during pregnancy, is because if they don't have regular health insurance most of the time and don't have insurance until they become pregnant, they may not have had access to testing and treatment. So syphilis is a sexually transmitted infection. That means that it's from sex. It comes from coming in contact with a syphilitic sore. So with syphilis, one of the main symptoms is a painless ulcer in the genital area. So this could occur in the genital area of men or women. It can also occur in the mouth, in the mucous membranes of the mouth, and in the anus or rectum. And so it can be difficult to see if you're having sex and lights are low and you just light a candle and all. That's why I often say, don't turn off all the lights and light the candles until you've had a chance to check out the goods. Other than that chancre, syphilis can cause a whole gamut of symptoms. Syphilis has been called the great pretender because it can mimic many other disease processes. And depending on what phase of syphilis that you're in, you may have different symptoms. So let's break down these phases and the symptoms that are associated with each one. The primary phase is most often associated with a chancre, which is a round, painless ulcer that can be found in the mouth, in the genital area, or in the anus or rectum. The chancres normally last about 3 weeks at a time, and then they will heal whether you've been treated for syphilis or not. The chancre is the most infectious stage of syphilis. That chancre is full of bacteria that can be passed to someone else. So if you have a chancre, an ulcer, or a lesion on your genital area, do not have sexual intercourse until you can be checked out by a medical provider. The secondary phase of syphilis can have multiple symptoms. Most common, we see a skin rash, usually one that doesn't itch. The interesting thing about this skin rash is that it can also show up on the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet, which is pretty rare. Most allergic skin reactions or other rashes are not going to be seen on the palms and the soles. Sometimes this rash can be so subtle that you don't even notice it. You might think it's just an allergic reaction to a new soap that you're using or something like that. So very important to pay close attention to your body. You can also see these raised gray lesions that can be in the moist areas, like in your groin, in the crevices, in the mouth or in the vagina or in the anus. And these are called condyloma lata. These are definitely characteristic skin lesions that only occur with syphilis. Other symptoms can be very non-specific, like fever, swollen lymph nodes, muscle soreness, fatigue, body aches. What does that sound like? The flu, right? So this is something that's very non-specific, but can certainly occur in the secondary phase of syphilis. If we haven't diagnosed and treated syphilis by the secondary phase, it will lead to the latent phase usually. The latent phase is when there are no symptoms at all. The latent phase can last 10 to 30 years after the initial infection. So the syphilis is just like laying up in your body, like chilling hard. If you have not been diagnosed and treated in the latent phase, then you may progress to tertiary phase. And tertiary phase can actually be fatal. This is when we see syphilis affect multiple organ systems in your body, from your brain to your heart to your liver, and even your bones, your joints. Your eyes can be affected. And so this is where we see people succumb to syphilis. And unfortunately, the reason that we know so much about the tertiary phase is the Tuskegee experiment, right? This is where folks with syphilis were just watched. They were expectantly managed, meaning they were just seeing what would happen to these folks who had syphilis. And that's so unethical. If we know that there is a effective treatment for a disease, we should actually be treating people for it rather than watching to see what happens with popcorn and a drink. Anyway, let me get off my soapbox about that because you know how I feel about equity. Tertiary stage is where neurosyphilis can occur. Neurosyphilis can cause anything from headaches to vision loss, problems with moving your muscles and coordinating your muscles properly, all the way up to dementia that's similar to an Alzheimer's disease patient. So now that we understand the 4 phases, let's talk about syphilis in pregnancy. Syphilis in pregnancy can be detrimental to not only the mom's health, but the health of the baby. Syphilis can lead to stillbirth. So especially babies who are in their late 2nd or 3rd trimester, syphilis is notorious for causing stillbirth and many other what are called congenital anomalies or problems with the development of the baby. Not only can syphilis lead to stillbirth, but it can also lead to neonatal death. And that is where a baby is born and passes away, days to weeks later because of a syphilis infection. Syphilis in pregnancy can be treated with penicillin regardless of whether or not the mama has an allergy to penicillin. We would admit that woman to the hospital and actually do what's called desensitization therapy. And that means basically making you less sensitive to penicillin and then treat you in the hospital with penicillin to make sure that you clear this infection so that you and your baby are safe. So how is syphilis diagnosed? Via a blood test. And there are several different tests for syphilis. There's an actual treponemal test that we can do to confirm syphilis, but there are screening tests, which may not be as specific, that we do for all pregnant women and certainly women who request sexually transmitted infection testing. I highly recommend, if you're going for your annual well woman checkup or pap smear, that you request being tested for syphilis and other sexually transmitted infections along with your well woman visit. There has been a link between syphilis and HIV. The risk of getting HIV when you have syphilis is 2 to 5 times higher. And look, syphilis can be cured, but HIV cannot. So you certainly want to be tested often if you are sexually active with more than one partner. or if you have suspicions about your partner, so that you can avoid getting HIV, which is incurable. So the treatment for syphilis is actually antibiotics, specifically penicillin G. Penicillin G is known to be most effective against syphilis, and it's administered as an intramuscular injection, meaning we inject it into a muscle. And so that is the best way to treat syphilis. If you have penicillin sensitivities or allergies, there are a few other regimens out there, but if you are pregnant, as I mentioned before, penicillin G is the way to go, allergy or not. And there is a procedure to desensitize the body to penicillin G so that you can be treated with penicillin G. Pregnant women specifically, because penicillin G has been shown to eradicate syphilis and protect your baby's health. So this injection actually cures syphilis, and certainly we want to follow up to make sure that that infection is gone, particularly in pregnant women. So now that we've learned about all these things, how do we prevent syphilis? Guess what your girl is gonna say? Monogamy, being faithful to your partner, and picking a partner who's faithful to you, right? Because we can only control our own actions. So we know what we're doing, but we may not always know what our partners are doing. Remember that I said that syphilis is more common in men sleeping with men. So that could be gay, bisexual, or other, as in men on the down low, who are sleeping with men. So it's very critical that we watch out for ourselves and our best health. Girl, you may be totally in love, and he might be too, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's faithful to you when it comes to sexual intercourse. So a properly used condom is one of our best lines of defense against sexually transmitted infections. So girls, I hope today's video was helpful for you. I hope you learned all about syphilis, especially those of us who are in our childbearing years, who are planning to become pregnant or who may already be pregnant. This is an important infection to know about. So drop your comments and questions in the comment section below. If this video was helpful for you, give your girl a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss a single Well Woman Wednesday episode. I'll catch you next week, girls. Peace.